Hey, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Knocked Conscious. Today, I had the pleasure of speaking with Chloe Valdary. She's the founder of Theory of Enchantment. It was a great conversation. We covered a lot of topics. Here it is. I hope you enjoy it. Hey, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Knocked Conscious. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Chloe Valdary. She is the founder of Theory of Enchantment. She is going to be on at Freedom Fest July 10th through the 13th in Las Vegas. I'm going to be there with media credentials. I'm so excited to meet all the people that I've met through this opportunity. Chloe, welcome to Knocked Conscious. Thank you so much for this opportunity. And tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure, Mark. Thank you. Thank you for having me on your platform. I really appreciate the opportunity as well. I am Chloe Valdary. I am 30 years old. I am the founder of an organization called Theory of Enchantment. We do inclusion and belonging work, which means we train companies and their teams to develop the proper skills that are necessary to handle conflict in productive ways, to welcome a rich, diverse set of backgrounds not only reflected in the staff, but also ideas, intellectually speaking, so that whatever they do at an organization, the products and services that they develop can be done in a healthy manner and in a way that's productive. So that's a little bit about me. We could definitely get into some of the details. A lot of people associate theory of enchantment as a alternative to diversity, equity, and inclusion organizations that were, I guess, in greater vogue closer to 2020, 2021. So we can talk about that if you want. But that's a little bit about me and my professional background.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that. I would like to actually get into that a little bit because I guess that's where we come into the woke, anti woke thing, the DEI thing, the CRT stuff. How does that play into everything? Because, like I said, I watched a couple of podcasts with you, and it seems to be that you hear about the anti racist movement.
Yeah.
And so I shared with a lot of people, I'll share with you just something because it's something we'll talk about, but I'm actually an anti theist, which is one of those things where
Oh,
it's like,
interesting.
yeah, so it's one of these things where it's and I'll explain that obviously down the road, but the anti-racism is kind of like if you're an anti this, you're an anti that. You use the forces of those things to counter. You're just a 180 to it. You're not
Sure.
a solution, right?
Sure.
It doesn't seem to be the solution. It just seems to be the counter force.
Sure.
In a weird way, blowback, right?
Yeah.
You seem to approach it from a very unique standpoint. So I'd love to hear a little bit about it. I did pull up I first of all I pulled up your logo and
Yeah.
I it's very interesting because what I've seen over the last handful of years is a closed black fist.
Yeah, you noticed the difference, huh?
And it's like the second I saw your logo, I see an open, I'm gonna show it's basically an open black hand.
Yeah.
And automatically I just think of a contrast there. Is that something
Yeah.
that was intentional?
It actually wasn't intentional. We had our designer design our logo. His name is Ryan. Shout out to Ryan Patterson who designed that logo. And there's actually different colors of the logo. It is an open hand. We have it in red, white, and black. And it did strike me. I did notice when we first came out with it that it was a contrast to the closed fists, as you like pointed that out, which is a symbol of many things. Like it's been associated with the Black Power movement. It's been associated with certain historical time periods in our nation's history that I don't begrudge per se, but it also definitely connotes a certain type of attitude and orientation that is associated with power. Whereas I would think our company and our company's philosophy and message is explicitly associated with love. And I don't know if you're familiar with the writings of Carl Jung's work. Carl Jung is a 20th century psychiatrist whose philosophy and ideas deeply inspired the theory of enchantment. He actually says that the opposite of love is power, which is interesting. Again, we didn't like come up with this on purpose. We didn't intentionally design it in that way, but it is meant to be an open hand to denote the shared human experience that everyone has as a human being, right? It's a very like species wide symbol, and it's meant to convey that kind of feeling when you see it.
Yeah, I really like that. So In the contrast to the anti-racism movement, I guess, how would you describe you speak of compassion and love. Would you like to go through the 3 principles of each and go through each of
Sure.
the 3 principles? Or
Sure, yeah. So there are three principles. Theory of enchantment. First principle is treat people like human beings, not political abstractions, which basically means don't treat human beings like symbols, right? Don't treat human beings like symbols of good or symbols of evil. Don't treat human beings like amulets or, you see this a lot happening in current discourses around the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, for example, where some people treat groups of people as symbols of good or symbols of evil. So like that's first rule is like don't do that. Treat people like human beings, not political abstractions. Second rule is criticize to uplift and empower, never to tear down or destroy. This is all about how to both receive and give feedback in ways that are productive, in ways that are healthy, and in ways that show the person that you're giving the feedback to that you care about them. Because if you don't care about them, there's actually no point in giving them feedback, right? Like if you don't think if
right.
you see a person is committing harmful behavior and you don't think they're actually capable of changing, why are you telling them to change? You don't even think they're capable of changing, so it doesn't make sense. Okay, and then the third principle is root
So it's
everything
like
you
a
do.
constructive criticism basically would be that kind of way.
It is a
A good I mean,
constructive,
if you're
yeah,
gonna say it that way, the best way is, in that comparative way. Because 'cause I'm old school, so you
yeah. You do it constructively, right? You do it to build, right? Is that what you mean by constructive?
absolutely, yeah. So when I say constructive criticism, it's like, this is where I feel like you could tweak and enhance it. It doesn't
Yeah,
have to be to tear down the project as a whole. So,
yeah,
okay, I'm glad I
exactly.
used that. I'm glad I used that terminology because I probably have some older people. Like I said, I've got 20 years on you, so we'll probably have that Venn diagram crossover of
Sure,
some people. So, okay,
for
so
sure.
and the third, what's the third principle based on, or what's it
So
called? What is it, and what's it based on?
So the third principle says root everything you do in love and compassion. It's deeply inspired by the centralizing of agape or unconditional love in the civil rights movement. And we believe that by practicing the first two principles and their skill sets that come with those two principles, you'll be able to show up in a way that is embodying love and compassion. So those are the three principles.
That's beautiful. So you implement these with businesses, and what kind of I guess verticals or disciplines do you implement your practices?
So we work with a whole array of different organizations. We've worked with tech companies, we've worked with schools, we've worked with hospitals. There's actually no common denominator except it's primarily small to medium-sized businesses, but they exist both in the for-profit and nonprofit space. We've done everything from run, 90-minute virtual workshops with executive teams in an organization to working with an organization for 2+ years, putting all of their managers through a training program where they're actually learning how to practice those skill sets on a daily basis. And it's been fun. It's been a really great time. I've definitely learned a lot as an entrepreneur, and as someone whose business partner, shout out to Peter Stein, brings a really like design systems level thinking to the business. I've learned a lot from working with him and building all of our products and services rooted in that sort of mindset.
That's really awesome. So we've talked about a lot of the philosophical stuff. How did you get to this point? How did you get to enchantment? What are some of the foundations on which you build it personally in your life, and how did you scale that out to a bit like a business? I mean, how did you turn your
Yeah.
passion to a business?
In terms of my personal motivation, I first started out as I majored in international studies. So I studied international relations basically at university with a concentration in conflict and diplomacy. And I studied the Israeli Palestinian conflict. So I actually wanted to originally develop a paradigm that would be responsive to that conflict in a way that was healing, in a way that was loving, and in a way that was compassionate. The reason I was particularly drawn to that conflict, as opposed to any other conflict, is because I grew up as a Christian observing Jewish holidays. So my sense of meaning, time, and space and culture has been heavily influenced by Jewish culture. And as a result, I have a very strong allergy to anti Semitism. I originally majored in film, but I actually switched majors to international studies when I was learning more about the the Islamic Republic of Iran and the things that the Ayatollah were doing back in 2012. So that motivated me to switch majors. And then I graduated in 2015, moved to New York. I'm originally, I think I said this already, from New Orleans, but I moved to New York and got a job at the Wall Street Journal. And while at the Wall Street Journal, developed a thesis on this topic of trying to build a paradigmatic response to the conflict that was rooted in love and compassion. Because in spite of the really beautiful education that I received, and I don't want to I cannot understate that, or I cannot overstate that rather. I
Right.
received an incredible education at the University of New Orleans. There was nothing about how to respond to conflict that was rooted explicitly in love, and so I thought that was missing, and so I wanted to develop that. And so I asked myself the question, well, if I want to know how we could get people to respond with love, maybe I have to ask, how do we learn how to love in the first place? And what are we already in love with? Maybe that will reveal to us or to me something about the human species and how and why we love. So from that point in the research paper, the thesis that I was creating, I started researching pop culture. I started researching Disney and Nike and Beyonce and brands that human beings have quasi religious like devotion to, at least historically speaking.
Yeah, like a gravitation towards, right?
For sure, yeah. To see if there's a common theme, a common denominator. And I discovered that many of these brands create content where their audience, where we the audience, saw ourselves and our potential reflected in the content, which is why we continue to gravitate towards it. It's like every major or good Disney film is a motif for the human condition. Some flawed, imperfect human being has to go through a series of obstacles, come out on the other side, basically having achieved or come to their higher self. Right? When
So
Nike
there's your
said,
hero's journey, right? There's your
for sure,
Peterson hero's journey in every Disney movie.
Joseph
Just like
Campbell, right? Like there's the classic hero's journey, and of course, I can tell that prior to switching majors and majoring in film, I had a love of screenwriting and I had a love of storytelling. So you can see that also embedded in this drive as well. Um,
that's beautiful. Well, yeah, I mean, you hear enchantment. I mean, come on,
yeah,
man. It harkens to a different thought than other
yeah,
words.
yeah, yes. You can hear my love of storytelling. You can hear my love of film. You can hear my love of like otherworldly sort of landscapes. I was a huge fan of Star Wars growing up. As a teenager, I had a crush on Anakin Skywalker, embarrassingly so, in retrospect, but I did. So yeah, you can
I
see
was
all
in
of
the
that.
theater with my parents. We watched Return of the Jedi in the
Oh wow,
theater.
wow.
Now, I remember on the posters, they used to, there was ones that said Revenge of the Jedi, and they renamed it. And you can actually look this up. It was
Oh,
Revenge of the Jedi, but the reason they didn't do that is because Jedis don't have revenge, or Jedi don't have revenge. So they did Return of the
oh,
Jedi. And
interesting.
that's why you see Revenge of the Sith in the like the sixth one or whatever. It's because of
Yeah.
Sith would have that, would exhibit revenge versus the more compassion, which is the return.
Do you know why?
And
Did they get feedback or something that it was?
I think it was a George Lucas thing. He said
Oh,
Jedi don't do revenge or something. Like he kind of, but they
interesting.
had everything printed. I mean, they had posters and everything. You can find like really rare posters and these things, but
Wow.
it's really interesting to see that and how that
I want
plays
to
out.
find one of those. Now I want to get my hands on one
Yeah.
of those.
Yeah, you can look that up, internet search real quick. You can find them, no
Yeah.
problem. Just
Well,
type in
super
Revenge of the
cool.
Jedi. Yeah.
I'm gonna look that up. That's awesome. So yeah, all of those influences got put into this thing that ended up being called the theory of enchantment. And in 2015, or by the end of 2015, I just had the three principles, and I was lecturing on college campuses in the United States, Europe, and South Africa. I ended up touring those areas of the world, speaking specifically about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. So I would lecture. I remember being in Frankfurt, Germany, in Berlin. I was in The Hague at some point. I was in
Wow, you were in The Hague.
Yeah, I was in Durban. I went to Soweto, and of course, all over the United States, different college campuses, reintroducing a way to understand and approach the Israeli-Palestinian conflicts through the lens of those three principles. And then afterwards, did this because I was working for a nonprofit, and I worked for that nonprofit for 2 years. And after that is when I officially established Theory of Enchantment as my own company. So I basically had an opportunity to sort of like workshop the ideas, at least on a lecture basis, working for that nonprofit. And then I was fortunate enough to get severance after my contract ended, which gave me space to just like work on things. Um, at which point I developed the Theory of Enchantment full course curriculum. And that curriculum is awesome. It's got 25 lessons and it really expands upon those three principles and builds a whole set of modalities and practices that go with those three principles. And it uses pop culture to reinforce those three principles. So we talk about, speaking of revenge, we talk about how parental baggage can be linked to uh, taking revenge on someone else or feeling vengeful against someone else. And we use, this is in the course, we use Killmonger from Black Panther as an example of that.
Okay.
And we contrast
Yeah.
T'Challa with Killmonger. And so, yeah, there's a lot of pop culture. And it is a central piece of Theory of Enchantment's long form course curricula. So it's really important because it's a great tool to use to teach people like these three principles ultimately.
And it does sound like it's more universal. It doesn't sound like it's I hate to say politically aligned, but it's not aligned in any specific political ideology, I would guess. But I would guess Enchantment has come under fire recently with Disney's stuff. Have you experienced any backlash from the name Enchantment with Disney's
No, no, I
recent stuff?
personally haven't. The organization hasn't.
Good, good.
Yeah, I
People
think these are.
associate some things. I always ask those weird questions
What
because
have you
I
seen
make
with
connections.
backlash? What have you
Well, I
seen with
mean,
back?
just Disney with Florida and how they just have the back and forth,
Oh, yeah,
far right's doing X and far left's doing Y and all that, just
sure.
the back and forth on that.
I see. Yeah, no, nothing has
So
happened with regards to us, but we'll see.
oh, good, good. Well, so you spoke of Christian and Jewish faith, or growing up that way. I grew up Lutheran. My
Mm,
mom worked at a catering company, and she was basically number two underneath the person who owned it. She was Jewish, so we always did
mm.
Passover dinners, and so we had a rabbi in the actual catering company come in and bless the
Oh
food and
wow.
watch us prepare. So I was very much entrenched in that, and growing up, I grew up in the 80s and
Mm,
we were partners with Israel. And
yeah,
I really would love to delve into this subject with you because I want to learn. I'm
sure,
not here to preach because you clearly were taught on the subject. So
sure.
I'll share what limited I know or what I feel at least and maybe go from
Yeah,
there. But I was a neocon. I was a neocon
yeah,
all the way. I enlisted in the
yeah.
military at 17. I
Wow.
just failed the physical. It's like I thought I was going to be that guy who was going to be, Iraq. I was all for it, all that. I had a t-shirt that
Yeah.
said this scud's for you. Not going to lie.
Mhm.
And then I woke up like later, like it took me, mine came from experience, not from knowledge, but everything was a lie, right? Or
Mm.
we find that we're getting our hearts broken by our country because we
Mhm.
keep finding out that they keep sneaking out on us at night.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? They keep stepping out on us a little bit. So
Sure.
I'm kind of getting a little heartbroken from it. So I'm a
Mm.
little bit Scott Horton anti-war. So I'm kind of more of
Mm.
like I am absolutely, the people are not the nation that I'm criticizing. I
Sure.
want to be clear. I want to clearly bifurcate. The people who are the Jewish people are not the people who are the ideology of the whatever's going on there. So
Sure.
I'm criticizing that ideology only. I just think that we have a way to just pull the funding in that way. That should be our voice. But I want to hear what you learned because please share everything that you know about it or understand about it.
Well,
Well,
to
not
do
everything, but
yeah, I was gonna say, 'cause I
we could
don't think you
we
want
could
me to do
start
that.
more
That
recently
would
because I'm familiar with I watched like Martyr Made, the Fear and
okay.
Loathing in the New Jerusalem. I watched that twice or listened to it
Okay.
twice.
Yeah.
What I mean, I'm like very much entrenched in my grandfather was
Mm.
a Nazi soldier.
Oh wow.
So whole other story, but my mother
Sure.
was under Hitler, Stalin, and Eisenhower. So
Wow.
so you can imagine that story. But
Yeah.
please share that if you could.
Well, I guess
What your thoughts are on it.
I would zoom out. My paradigm, the way that I perceive the reason why the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is such a charged conflict more than any other conflict, I really believe this because it implicates our identities. Like people sometimes say it's a foreign conflict, but I actually don't think it is. Puritans who came to this country escaping religious persecution conceive of themselves as the new Israel, right? They're using a language and informed by a set of stories and ideas that developed in that part of the region. Slaves in the South, my ancestors, as they eventually were brought from West Africa to the South and, made to work the cotton fields, developed songs and an oral sort of like art form that ended up becoming gospel, the blues, etc., that was taken up from stories of the Torah, right? Conceiving of themselves as the Hebrews in Egypt, toiling under Pharaoh's iron fist. So those are just two examples to illustrate why, or the power of the paradigmatic influence on how we conceive of ourselves as a Puritan nation, as a Protestant nation, as a nation that has obviously been shaped and formed and deeply influenced by African Americans. That sense of self of Israel is at the, I wouldn't say center perhaps, but it's there, it's prominent. So that's the first thing I would say. That's why I think it
I
stimulates
mean,
us
we
in
do
ways
speak of
other conflicts
Judeo-Christian
don't.
values, right?
Yeah,
We say
it's
Judeo-Christian values.
yeah,
And that's the thing where we'll talk probably down the road about it. But yeah, to your point, these values were based in these traditions in some way. They are based in a book, which happens to be the most, printed and sold and
yeah.
spread or shared, book.
Yeah, I mean the seal of the United States almost was going to be literally a depiction of Moses like guiding the children of Israel out of the land of Egypt, and then it changed to something else. But that was the original
Oh
like
wow,
edit
I didn't know that.
for the United States seal. So it's deeply embedded in our psyche, even if we're not conscious of it.
Right.
And I think that's why we are so
But
charged
it
on it. But
makes
that's not me.
sense. I mean, think about the escape. I mean, I mean Moses's journey and the Protestants coming here,
Yeah,
escaping
exactly.
persecution. I mean, I could totally see that because you have, to your point, it's a hero story. You
Yeah,
need, it's like the one that you're going to emulate to get you to your, it's the one that
yeah,
motivates you to do it, right? Because it's like, oh my gosh, somebody did it before me. That's,
yeah.
now we can do it, kind of thing.
I don't know if you've read Maps of Meaning or seen any of Jordan Peterson's lectures on that particular topic.
I have, and it's a deep book. I mean, I've done all the 12 rules and all that. And we can talk Peterson too, because I'm hot and cold and warm and lukewarm, and I'm kind of all over the place on him right now because of what's going on. But I have seen him lecture live, and like I remember my
Cool.
girlfriend
Same.
sitting next to me, and I'm mouthing along or like ahead of him,
Oh
like
wow.
I'm like that, and she's
Wow.
watching me going, stop doing that, and I'm like, I just like following. And then when I saw your podcast with him, to be completely honest, absolutely blown away just by the
Oh wow.
conversation. And I'm hoping that I can even scratching close to that. So, but
Yeah,
I'm
I
enjoying it so far.
I appreciate you saying that. I bring up Maps of Meaning. Maps of Meaning is the only book by Jordan Peterson that I've read.
Okay.
And like the story of Israel has that kind of power. Now, charged power. Now,
Yeah.
I would say that if you're Jewish, this is very hard because what that means is the people are constantly going to be either projecting their own light onto you or they're going to be projecting their own darkness onto you or a combination of both. This goes back to the first principle, right? Treat people like human beings, not political abstractions or not like symbols or amulets, right? And so this is one of the things that I think is prominent in this conflict. You also have people, of course, projecting their light and darkness onto Palestinians. Um, and that for me
So
is
you're
the
saying,
main.
you're claiming there's an external force that is projecting all the pieces onto both the Palestinian and the Israeli side.
I'm saying that human beings, when they're
As-
commenting as a whole, like think of like the
Correct.
collective
Okay.
unconscious or whatever, like
Yeah,
the collective
absolutely.
unconscious of the United States, is like simultaneously projecting its light and its darkness onto Israel Palestine,
Got it.
and the conflict would be probably that much easier to solve if that wasn't happening. And that's hard because that's a psychological thing. That's not, to me, the issue is not of like, I mean, for geopolitical reasons, I don't subscribe to the idea of like we can just remove aid and everything will be fine. If we remove aid, Hamas will continue to receive aid from Iran, Hezbollah will be emboldened, and Israel will really be under threat. So, just from a geopolitical, strategic perspective, I don't think that's wise. I do think that it's wise to make some aid conditional, but I don't think it's
Yeah, I
like,
don't think yanking a carpet out is any good idea to anything. I mean, I don't think
yeah,
just yanking the plug at the bottom of the tub is smart. Just
yeah. No, not a good idea. Some aid making conditional, absolutely, but it has to be like very thought out. I think that there should be a multinational like cooperation plan similar to the Marshall Plan to reinvest in Gaza, but that requires some sort of significant defeat of Hamas, some sort of defenestration of Iran's power or influence in the region. That's like a multi-pronged, multi-government coordinated action that I have no level of expertise on how to bring about. But what I do have some expertise
right.
on how to
Yeah,
bring about.
we seem to have really good questions. I don't have all those answers, but I'm
Well,
always worried about the people with the answers. I love
yeah,
the people with the questions, right? The people who come with
yeah,
the answers are the ones that scare me because they think they know it all, and it's like, no, we don't know it all, right?
yeah, for sure, for sure. I think I would hypothesize that one of the things that makes it harder to get to that multinational agreement or coordination is the fact that this is a very not just literal conflict, but it is a symbolic conflict onto which we project all of our identities. Again, mostly unconsciously, like we're not aware. It's like
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
David Foster Wallace's commencement speech where he talks about the three fish in the water, and one fish says
Yes.
to another, "How's the water?" And then the other fish says, "What's
Yes.
water?" It's like that.
What's water, right? Because when you're in the
It's
water, you don't know what
don't
water
know it's
is.
water. Yeah,
Right.
like it's the
I'm
water.
totally with it.
It's the water,
Yeah.
and no one realizes
Try
that it's the
try the
water.
philosophical question, is water wet? Try that one
Oh,
because
oh, I
water is
can't. I'm
actually water.
not.
So is it actually wet? That's a whole other one. But
That's
anyway.
funny. That's funny. So yeah, I mean, I would say that like my not task, but my charge to people who are interested in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and we actually just put out a mini lesson, a mini course in the theory of enchantment framework on the conflict, is to like it's again a question of identity. It's a question of how do you relate to yourself, how do you relate to your parents, how do you relate to the people around you, how do you relate to the negative parts of yourself? Are you holding those parts of yourself with compassion, or are you projecting them outward unconsciously onto another human or another group of people? If you are doing that, it's okay. We all do it. We just need to like bring conscious attention to it, get some skill sets in our arsenal so that we can stop doing that. Because if we stop doing that, once we stop doing that, we can come to the present moment and we can solve problems in the present moment. Like the difference is really night and day. If I'm talking to you and you're, you know, triggering a memory of my childhood with my father, then I'm not here with you in the present moment. I'm actually
Right. Well,
responding to
let's use Israel
yeah,
Palestine as an example. It did not start
true,
October 7th. It didn't start
true.
67, didn't start 48. I mean, these are, we can go date after date after date. These things didn't start
Yeah,
like just, you know what I mean? You can always turtles all the way down, right? So,
yeah, for sure.
we can always find a starting point and a spark, but it's like, okay, okay, now what,
I'll give you that's a great example. So there's this thing that gets brandied about this terminology of settler colonialism that gets used. It gets used to accuse Israelis in the West Bank. The creation of Israel is accused of being a settler colonialist project. This is an example to me of shadow. Why is it an example of shadow? We can separate the question of did the state of Israel and the reestablishment of the state of Israel, were there actions that were taken that were harmful to Palestinians? Absolutely. Right? Should there be repatriation and reconciliation and restoration in order to solve for that harm that was done? Absolutely. When people, however, claim that Israel is a settler colonialist state, they're usually trying to suggest that Jews are not indigenous to the land in question, which is simply
Right,
false.
and they're not
Right?
welcome or something in any kind of
Right,
way, in
right.
some kind of
Somehow
cultural historical
they're
reference.
like less than, or they're,
Right.
they're condescended
Yeah.
to, right?
Yeah, you spoke of
Um,
supremacy in your
right.
enchantment as well.
So this is a perfect example of shadow happening, shadow and supremacy happening like hand in hand. And here's what I mean by that. Like, the reason why there are Palestinian Arabs in the region is because Arabs colonized the land at some point, right? It's not like they were there first. I think that there's an over
Yeah.
indexing or an over emphasizing on like, are am I indigenous? Are you indigenous? It's like
I believe there was a coexistence, and
there were in some cases coexistences, but there was also the case that, like,
to an extent, yeah, I mean, certainly
you
you
know,
had your tribes and you had your conflicts and whatnot, you know?
well, you also had you had Jews being treated a certain way under the Islamic system. They were treated as less than, had to pay extra taxes, all these
Mm.
various issues that came out of.
Oh, I mean, they've been persecuted throughout history. I
Yeah.
mean, I even look at what my grandfather would, he had some brainwashing there, you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
when he came to America and he saw the news was kind of, this is the way I saw it. I saw any kind of power from any kind of Jewish people out of competency, because
Hmm.
there happens to be a competency associated with an Ashkenazi DNA. I don't know why, but there happens to be. Sorry, it's just like biology. This is how it works, right? So when you see that and then it's associated, well, then power does end up getting corrupted, but the, it's from the competency of the person initially to get to the level they got, usually.
Sure.
Then it
Sure.
gets corrupted, and then they bring up their cronies with them, and that's when it gets all crumbly, right? So, like, I totally understood. Like, I never understood my grandfather saying that stuff, but it's like I see how people like Kanye talks about it in people, and it just doesn't sit right with me in that way. And I understand like growing up, but I remember a story hearing something about the it wasn't the Japanese empire, it was like the sub guy to the empire leader, and
Okay.
he visited Hitler and he said, if Japan only had a common enemy in the Jew like you do, we could get a
Mm.
lot further. It's kind of like
Mm.
9/11 galvanized us, right? Like
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
10/7 galvanized Israel. And
Yeah.
like that was their thing, is like they saw the other,
Right.
they othered them, and they saw them as the thing to unite, galvanize around almost.
Right. And so this is where I guess I would try to lay out a kind of description of what I mean again by shadow and supremacy.
Yeah,
Say
please.
the people who say that Israel is a settler colonialist state in response to, let's say, Palestinian Arabs, are not wrestling with the fact that the reason why there are Arabs there in the first place is because of history of Arab colonialism, and that's what the shadow that's like what not seeing your own shadow does, right? You can't see
Right.
your shadow and then you project it outward onto the other so that you can feel greater than, bigger than, better than, and not have to deal with your own insecurities. And there's inevitably insecurities. This is where I would say, like, United States foreign policy writ large is, of course, there would be insecurities within, let's say, Arab
The entire
communities.
thing's an insecurity right now. Let's not kid ourselves. This is not
For
going
sure,
well
but this
across
time
the
I'm
board.
speaking psychologically here, though. So, like, let's say
Yeah, absolutely.
we as Americans, I'm generalizing. We as Americans project, because of 9/11 and Iraq and Afghanistan, our insecurities onto Arabs, right? So that we can feel bigger,
Correct.
better, etc. And so that gets internalized in certain ways, I'm sure, by let's say people in the Arab community who then project that insecurity further down the line. It's just like projection of insecurity, projection of insecurity,
Absolutely. Yeah.
projection of shadow. And so the question, the great psychological task before us is for all of us, or a significant percentage of us, to take responsibility for our own shadow and to recognize that shadow and light depend upon each other in order to exist, and that this is the true meaning of integration, a word that I love because it obviously has great cultural weight in our nation's history. And it takes a lot of practice to actually be able to stand and say, here I am, flaws and all. I accept myself completely, unconditionally, right? I know that I'm a sacred being made in the image of the divine. If you wanna go there, and there's nothing that you can do, say, and there's nothing that I can do or say that will ever take away from that, right? That's a sea change in the way we relate to religion. That's a sea change in the way that we relate to ourselves as human beings. That's basically what we're trying to shift in the culture by contributing to the conversation.
Okay, so part of it is like when I think about grace is very recent to me. I'm not
Mm,
gonna lie,
okay.
and it's more because I'm very dark. I'm not gonna lie. I see
Okay.
dark. It's very odd how I do it. It's like I fight darkness because when I see dark things and people,
Yeah.
um, I don't wanna like throw anybody specific under bus, but when I see it, like I can see exactly how the darkness and where it's gonna play out. But
Okay.
I'm so aware of it that I'm like consciously incapable of actually acting that way. But I
Mm.
think a lot of people instinctively act that way without even consciously getting to that point. Does that make sense? So
When
there's
you
like
say
that
act
middle
that
point
way, what do
between
you mean?
consciousness. Well, they might act evilly because
Oh,
they don't have it in their consciousness, so it's still part of their unconscious, and it's more of a reaction
sure.
than a conscious action.
Sure.
And then there's
Okay.
some people I think that consciously act evilly. We
Sure.
we can use those names, but it's like I see those paths too, and it's weird because I see those paths, I just don't choose them in any way because they're not right in my opinion. They're
Yeah.
wrong or bad.
So
So
how does
how do
grace
you?
come in to all of that for you?
Oh, so what I've really learned lately is like with that anger, I get angry with that, and I've never
Mm.
been able to say, well, I have darkness in me too.
Mm.
I am also capable of that, even though I don't
Yeah.
act on it, I'm still capable of it, and to think that I wouldn't, like I said, I come from a very interesting history. To think that
Yeah.
not everyone did that, I mean, my grandfather is no different than any other German citizen in 1940 X amount, 1940 X, so the grace comes in now that I'm noticing my flaws and how
Mm.
deeply I'm flawed.
Mm.
So I allow that, like, I use an example now, something about, like, Jimmy Dore said something
Mm.
about learning about something about that vaccine, and then somebody jumped on him about, "Oh, now you're talking about it." It's like, "Yeah, I was dumb back then." It's like, have a little grace, like
Yeah.
the guy's,
Yeah.
Tucker Carlson, have a little grace. The guy's
Yeah.
telling you how he's showing his work, and then
Mm.
I look at someone like a Chris Cuomo, and I am incapable of offering
Mm.
grace at this time. The
Mhm.
man is incapable of any humility and
Mm.
any kind of ability to admit anything, whatever. Even to say I was bamboozled this whole time, I mean, nothing. So I
Mm.
can't offer someone grace in that way. So
Sure.
I've learned that way to manage it. Is that a healthy way to manage it, or should I offer grace across the board?
I mean, I think your process is your process, right? Like I wouldn't
Okay, I like that.
tell you need to adopt the process. However, so grace to me is related to the word gratitude and grateful. Etymologically, those words are related. And so to be in a state of grace is to be able to give thanks for all that comes, the good, the bad, the hard, the easy, the comfort, the discomfort, the joy, the rage, the sadness, like all of it. And so we do have these consumer products. One is called Dojo, the other is called Tuning Fork, which is building it's a community of practice where every day you're basically expressing gratitude for different parts of yourself, like whether it's your tendency to condescend to people or your tendency to sometimes feel like you're in a state of flow and other times feel like you're in a state of defensiveness. There's also, of course, a noticing piece that's a part of those practices. Like part of the point
An
is to
awareness, right?
notice. Yeah, to notice because like you said, a lot of people, for all of us, to a certain extent, is unconscious, right? So if we can get into a habit of noticing without a stigma attached to it because you're not going to want to notice if there's stigma attached to it, right? So in dojo there are all these questions like right about a time where you felt expansive and a time where you felt defensive. What were the differences between those two feelings? Right about a time where you saw another group of people as a symbol for good or bad. What was the context? We all do this, right? So if we can surface that and get to a place where we're able to notice it without judgment, grace will start to come up, because what will happen is you'll start to see the never ending dimensionality of what it means to be you, right? And hopefully you'll come to a state of awe, and grace and compassion, you'll be able to extend that to another human being as a result.
That's beautiful. I like that because, like, I'll be honest, there's a lot of deprogramming. So I'm the child of two German parents. Like I said, both born
Mm,
in Germany. So they
mm,
met here, but it's like it's funny because I mentioned the Jordan Peterson only because you spoke with him, but like he spoke about how Germans viewed things. They weren't judgmental. They saw everything as disgust. They viewed it with
mhm.
disgust. And
Yeah.
when you see something as disgusting, you have to eradicate it. And
Yeah.
every action that was not deemed within the guidelines of that of growing up was disgusting.
Yeah.
So, like, you can imagine the backlash that I received for anything outside of that really tight box that they had painted for me, you know what I mean? So,
Sure, yeah.
but, so it's just one of those things. So, I wanna talk about love if we could, because I
Sure.
watched, well, I think it was with John Wood Jr. about loving
Mhm.
others. Okay, I I don't know. I think it's a trope. You have to love yourself before you can love others or something like that. I
Yeah.
hear this, love yourself before you love others.
Yeah.
I'm not going to lie with you. I loathe myself, and that's not a joke. I
Okay.
absolutely loathe almost everything about myself. And that's just, yeah, I can't explain it. It's a whole
Okay.
other thing, but I have a healthy relationship of 6 years and I show
Mm,
every way that I can show love that I can. And when I
mhm.
heard your words about the way to finally love yourself is by showing love to others in a way, is that, could you share with me your philosophy on that?
Yeah, it goes back to what we were just talking about. If I can express gratitude, and I would say gratitude is a quality of love, or quality of unconditional love, to give thanks for everything as it comes, because it's a part of the miracle of being alive. What a wild experience we're both having right now, just of being alive, and like at this time and place, and having this conversation over this technology that's enabling us to do so. Right? It's a miracle, but it's also easy to take for granted. And so this idea of
Yeah, like
practicing
toilet
grat
paper.
yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly. So many things we take for granted.
Right.
It's
Anyway,
it's
sorry.
it's
I just
wild.
I always try to like throw one example in there just so people can kind of, oh
Yeah, it's
yeah,
good.
I dealt with that. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
anyway,
Running
please
clean
continue.
clean water. Like there's
Yeah.
so many places around the world that don't have clean water. We take it for granted.
Right.
So I'm with you on that. That's really important. Um, so there's this idea that we practice in the theory of enchantment, which is expressing gratitude for all that we are, including, let's say, for example, the fact that you loathe yourself. Like there would be a quest in the theory of enchantment, if I were to like tailor it according to you specifically. It'd be like, oh, like notice a time in the past day or the past week where you felt self contempt, and write about it. And just the act of noticing it, I am willing to bet, would reveal to you moments where you're not loathing yourself.
Yes, and I want to be clear about
Right?
that. It's a general loathing, and I wanted to give you the hard one, and then we can always soften back, right?
Yeah.
Let me hit the point. But it is true. It's to your point is I've really learned to manage it, and
Mm,
it's been it's about almost about 10 years, maybe 9 years ago or something that I started that's a whole other story, but to manage that part of that loathing because I'm very
yeah.
aware of the poor portions that I don't like myself and I understand even where they're rooted. So I've gotten
Yeah.
to that point about it myself. A lot of people don't have the fortune that I had to afford
Mm,
someone to talk to in the way
sure.
that was able to talk to me in the way that I could
Sure.
break it down, right? So like that's where I show a lot of grace and gratitude is
For
like
sure.
I may have some stuff up here, but at least I'm fortunate enough to be able to address them, and I
Yeah.
hope other people can do the same.
I relate to that as well. I actually struggled with low self-esteem as a child into my teenage years. So I also have a little bit of that self-loathing in me. And the theory of enchantment has helped me, along with many of, teachers, mentors, people who have shown me incredible love and compassion, parents, have helped me with that. But that is something that I've struggled with as well. And I'm sure there's a bit of that that's motivated the creation of the theory of enchantment. So I resonate with that.
It's beautiful. So
Yeah.
thank you for sharing that as well, because I think we all have I mean, we kind of all come from similar places in some way because whatever is, the worst thing that's happened to you is the worst thing that's happened to you, regardless of
Yeah.
that level. We talk about contrast, right? Like
Yeah.
everybody talks about, I just want to feel happy. You can't feel just happy. There's no happy without feeling some other contrast to happy. What are you going to compare happy to? Like, I don't understand how people
Yeah.
don't get, like, the contrast is, like, the whole thing about life, and it's all the different shades, it's not just black and
Yeah.
white and binary, it's all those different colors and shades in between.
You know what I love about the word happy though, or happiness, is that like it's related. So I don't know if you've noticed, but I'm obsessed with words. The word,
Etymologist, right?
yeah, the word happy it contains the same root word for happening, like something's happening, or it's the same word, and
Yes.
you could argue probably. I mean, I have tried to argue this. I don't know if I've been successful, but like the original word, if you just look at it at face value just really means to be present in everything that's happening. Or
Okay.
through everything that's happening. And that
Well, we
definition of
twisted
happy,
it, right?
yeah, whenever I hear the word happy now or happiness, now I hear that and it brings me such joy. It brings me such joy because it's a tangible meaning, right? Like I know what that means. That's something I can actually achieve. It's hard, but I can actually achieve that. I feel that. I feel like I
Right.
can be
You can
present.
achieve presence, right? Like
I can
Eckhart
achieve
Tolle, Power of
presence.
Now, right? In a way.
Exactly, exactly. I can achieve that, and that feels like empowering, right? As
It
opposed to,
is.
oh, I want to be happy, and I have no idea what that word means. It's sort of like a vague feeling word. Um, so anyway, I thought I'd share that because that just that just makes me laugh that word contains such roots.
Yeah, and I really appreciate that, and we're gonna get to one of the other words as well. But
Yep.
if I may share a story to kind of solidify this part is like the happiness part. I've started to kind of get more busy, and with that, I spent a little
Mm-hmm.
bit I've not been able to be as attentive in my relationship, but we always have a
Mm-hmm.
date night. So
Mm-hmm.
we always have a date
Beautiful.
night. So it's like when it's date night, everything's off.
Yeah.
Everything's the phone, you know what I mean? It's like you have to be present with the person you're with in the moment. You can't
Yeah.
think about the next post or the next reply or the next thing you're going to upload or you know what I mean? The next piece of news.
Yeah.
You have to be in that moment. And it really is important to just kind of really stop and take a breath and look around just for a second. I really
Yeah.
appreciate
Absolutely.
that. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So you talk about compassion. So part of that
Yes.
word is passion.
Yes.
Passion, has obviously been twisted over the years. Passion used to mean the things through which we would struggle and do anything to get to, right? So it really is about the struggle,
Yeah.
not about, you know what I mean? The thing that we would struggle through, not just because passion now is like, oh, I have a passion for this until it gets boring and then you
Yeah.
have a passion for something else.
Right.
It's not a passion, right?
Right.
The passion of the Christ is the same original story. So what are your thoughts
Yeah.
about passion, compassion, how they integrate and how like those words and how that work with your model or what are your thoughts
Yeah.
on those?
So compassion with pain, right? With suffering.
With suffering.
To be with suffering. So I would say when we talk about like if you do these practices, you'll start to have compassion for yourself, right? I think that the contrast is like experiencing pain and trying to run away from it. And what I mean by that in a very concrete manner is let's say that I experience sadness, which I have as a result of having low self esteem. I didn't like that feeling. The feeling of sadness made me feel very uncomfortable physically. Um, but over time, I learned to be with my sadness. A great example of this is like the blues as a musical genre. The blues was invented as a way to be with one's sadness. The idea behind the blues, as Albert Murray says, is that the blues is about love. By singing the blues, I get rid of the blues as such. But you're not trying to escape the blues. You're not trying to escape the sadness, right? You're actually
Well,
learning how to be
oneness.
with.
Be
Yeah, but you're
with, right?
learning.
With, yeah.
I bring up the musical piece because it's like a very. I don't know. I'm a musician. I love singing and playing
Oh,
guitar,
we can talk
and
music. I will say
yeah,
two of my favorite documentaries. I don't know
yeah.
if you look in the background here.
I do, but
I
I
think I've
can't really
got
see.
Marley. Bob
Oh,
Marley's
cool.
right there. And that's Hendrix, and that's
Yeah.
Muhammad Ali there, and there's Billy Joel over there.
Oh, cool.
So
Okay.
anyway, so
Nice.
um, I've got a bunch of
So
other stuff, but Anyway, oh, please go
Well,
ahead.
so music is a great example. It's like a concrete. You're a musical person. You know what I mean when I say like being with your sadness in the context of the blues, right? Now, music is one of many modalities that helps us practice that. Journaling is another modality that helps us practice that, and
I mean,
that's the
it's the same thing.
modality.
I mean, music is really poetry to sound, right? Like it's not, it's
Yeah,
just another enhanced step, right? Music was poetry. So I just wanted to mention, if I could, two
yeah,
documentaries if you haven't
sure,
watched them.
sure.
One is called Muscle Shoals, and
Okay, haven't seen it.
it tugs, you can watch it not even on YT. I'm not going to say that group, but you could probably watch it for free on there. And it's about
Okay,
Muscle Shoals music, and like how they brought in Percy Sledge, and like When a
okay,
Man Loves a Woman. When I hear that
okay.
song, you want to
Yeah.
hear pain and with the suffering. That
Mm,
is all of it. You know what I mean? And then, if I
yeah.
may, the other one was called Hitsville, and it's about Motown. And if I
Okay.
may, I just saw Smokey Robinson a couple weeks ago in April. I saw him at
Oh, cool.
82 years old in Vegas. Yeah, my
Oh,
girlfriend and
wow.
I drove up. It was so much fun. Yeah. So
Wow.
anyway, but yeah. So with
I'm
the
just writing
suffering,
those
talk
down.
to me about your musical background and that piece.
So I've been producing my own original songs since maybe 2017, 2018. I like to imbibe on marijuana, isolate myself in my room, go on Logic Pro, and just go to town. Lay beats,
I
record. Oh, is that a tincture?
I know not of what you speak. Yes, it might be. I'm not sure. Anyway,
um,
I like the term imbibe. It's just one of my favorite words.
yeah, I love that word too. It's a great word. So yeah, I've been producing
And Harper
original.
Burn One Down is one of my favorite songs. It's such a great song. I used to sing it and
Oh,
stuff.
I don't know that. I don't know that song.
Oh, I'll share it
Um,
with you sometime. You'll like it.
okay, cool. So I like to make music as a like. It's interesting. For some people, journaling is their thing that moves the energy, like stuck energy out. For me, it's actually primarily music. Music and dance. Actually, there's a great toss up between those two, but music, especially, when I can put things to sound, the sound that resonates with me deeply, and sing out whatever I'm sitting with or whatever I'm struggling with, wrestling with, etc. It actually moves it out, like it clears space for me. And so I've been doing that since, like I said, 2017. I've just started to perform live for the first time in a long time since COVID, actually. So I'm excited and
Okay.
nervous about that, but I'm excited about it.
Do you have any
Uh,
dates? Do you have like a link with some dates or anything? Or
I don't have a link, but August 8th, I am performing a 30-minute set at Mike Geffner's open mic night in New York, Brooklyn, New York, if anyone is in town and wants to swing by.
I like it. We'll definitely have to plug that for sure. So is
Yeah.
do you play and sing, or what's your instrument of choice, or what?
I'm primarily just going to be singing over songs that I've produced electronically, but I do play guitar. I play pentatonic
Very
scale on
cool.
guitar, and I like to jam with others. I also play a little bit of djembe, again, when I'm jamming with others. So, and I sing as well. And I really increasingly enjoying singing a lot.
Singing is my thing. I was actually a singer, like in a cover band for a handful of years.
Oh, cool. What was
So
that like?
yeah,
What was the touring situation like?
yeah, it wasn't like that. It was like weekends only. So I had like a
Okay.
full-time job, but I was
Yeah.
putting in like 80, 90 hours because I'd work till, 6 days in a row and then do that. And then, those are till four or
Yeah.
5 in the morning. And it's a
Oh,
grind,
wow.
but like I have a weird claim to fame. You can look it up, but
Okay.
I was on a band called Jumper in Philly,
Okay.
just outside Philadelphia. And they were on a show called VH1's Cover Wars. It was a one season thing, and they actually won the thing. And I had just joined them like on like a trial basis when they had
Mm.
won. So I wasn't in the show, but I
Oh,
was
okay.
with them at the time that they were going through it. But I knew I was like
That's
on a
cool.
trial basis. So that's my only claim to real fame. But it was just fun stuff. But yeah, singing, it's funny because singing for me was, I took it so seriously because I wanted to be accurate. And I didn't get
Oh, yeah,
lost
you
in
want it
it
to be
as much.
precise.
I have such a perfectionism in me, but when I'm sitting here at the computer and I'm working remotely, tears are flowing and I'm just belting out
Oh,
all
wow.
pitch and I don't care what it is, it's just beautiful.
Yeah.
So, Yeah, like what
Yeah.
I don't know if you're familiar with like a lot of soul R&B music, but the Impressions, Curtis Mayfield,
Um,
People Get Ready.
yeah.
That
Yeah, of
song
course.
just sings to me. That song,
Yeah.
I hear it and I listen to it, and then I hear a version from Aretha and the
Yeah.
Staple Sisters with the Weight and the band, and I just get lost in all kinds of music. So music
Yeah.
is just such a beautiful thing.
So that is a great encapsulation of compassion. I feel like music is actually like the perfect sort of container to describe compassion, because if you're feeling sad, or if you're feeling angry, or if you're feeling anything, to sing it is to be with it by definition, to be with the
Yeah.
emotion, to be with the feeling, as opposed to running away from it. That is what I mean by compassion.
That's
And
beautiful.
and you can see people, everyone connects to it, right? It's a universal thing.
Yeah. It is. I mean, it wouldn't work. I mean, and it's interesting because I actually relate to like rhythm.
Mhm.
And there's something about I there's people I use Kanye West.
Mhm.
He has he understands how the frequency, the pace, there's it's like I'll almost I I'll admit my ignorance. It almost feels African in nature because we're all from Africa. So it almost
Yeah.
feels like he strikes at the core, the first 20 people that were dancing around a fire. It's like that beat. And I think of
Yeah.
like a weird one. I think of the song, the remix of Fallout Boy, This Ain't a Scene. It's an
Mm.
arms race. And that's like
Mm.
gong, gong, gong. And it's just like this almost like just rhythm, and it just pulls you in. And then
Yeah.
I listen to 808s and Heartbreak, and I'm just like
Yeah.
sucked in. And then he
It's a
opens his mouth, and I'm
vortex.
like, come on, Kanye.
It's a
So,
vortex, right?
the
The
vortex. There you go. Yeah. Talk.
Yeah, it's I'm fascinated by sound, and there is something implicit in the theory of enchantment that is related to sound, because it's enchantment, right? There's a chant, there's a singing, that this idea that everything is singing, everything is alive, and if you're not
And it's
relating,
together in unison, right?
and
And it has to.
if you're not relating to yourself and others in that way, then that produces disharmony. And so we want to bring you back to a state of harmony where you're able to relate in that way. And the way you were describing Kanye, that's how I relate to Afro beats or Afro house. Like
Yes. Yes.
I feel like I heard that in the womb, like in my mother's womb. That sound feels so ancient and so
Maybe
primordial
with
to
a
me.
heartbeat. It might be heartbeat related or.
Yeah, for sure. Nina Simone actually talks about this in one of her songs, where she actually, of
Oh,
course, it's like when she
Nina
does Miriam
Simone.
Makeba's. So she was asked, Miriam Makeba from South Africa asked her to do one of her songs, and she did it live. It's called West Wind. It's a really beautiful song. If you haven't listened to it, check it out. But
I'm gonna listen to it right after we're done because Nina, I love Nina. So
so she, in the beginning, introduces the drummers, and she says, like, I want to introduce you to the drummers. They're the heart and soul of the band. And if you think about it, all of our lives are centered around our heartbeat, and that's rhythm, is it not? That's what she says. And then the drummers start drumming, and then she just goes into this. It's a really, really beautiful composition.
that's cool. I love that. That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like and it's like there's a song like Paul Simon, Diamonds in the Soles of Her Shoes.
Yeah.
The opening part of that Shamama, just that
Do you
beautiful.
know? Do you know? So that album, that whole album.
I
No,
think it's
there's
Graceland,
a
right?
there's another album actually that I'm thinking of. I think it's like Rhythm of the Saints, maybe. I might get that.
Okay.
I might be getting that wrong. Um, I think it's called Rhythm of the Saints or something like that. But there's songs that there's one particular song called "She Moves On," which starts with a djembe. I think it's a djembe. I don't know if it's djembe, but it starts with like that Congo drum sound. It's really beautiful. There's a bunch of songs on that particular album that he performed live in Central Park in like 1991 that are really, really
That's the
good.
one I always listen to is the one that live
Yeah,
performance. Yeah,
yeah,
it's so beautiful. So,
it's
yeah, big
really, really
fan.
beautiful.
Music has always moved me. It's just always been a thing because, like, we're from like Philadelphia area, so like my mom saw little Stevie Wonder when he was like 14.
Wow.
It's like, wow. It's like
Yeah.
they went down the shore and they put on oldies. And that's what or not
Yeah.
oldies back then, but for oldies for us. So like that was
I love Stevie
my mom
Wonder.
kind of just pulled me right in. So yeah. And if you haven't seen Hitsville, that's definitely what that's about as well with
Okay.
Smokey, Barry Gordy and Stevie and Michael Jackson, for example. And
Yeah.
I've I did a whole podcast with Michael Jackson's nephew Taj about the
Oh,
whole
wow.
allegations. So I don't.
Wow.
We could talk about that. We could talk about anything. I'd love to get in your spirituality side
Sure,
or
let's talk
anything
about
that
it.
you'd be interested in because I for example, like I said, I consider myself an anti-theist, and I'll explain that. But
Yeah.
I've had a person who had me on I had him on my podcast for 2.5 hours sharing this sick religion. Tell me
Mhm.
about it.
Yeah,
I'd love
yeah,
to
yeah.
hear, so I'm here to hear what people say because personally, the personal faith, zero issue with, and I'll explain the other
Yeah.
stuff, but zero issue with that direct link because we all there has to be some kind of connection in that way. It's when
Yeah.
humans get involved that I would find it to be the challenge, right? When you create the hierarchy out of it. So it's almost
Oh,
like
I
it's government for God. It's like
see.
I never understood the libertarian thing is like libertarians are Christian. I'm like, wait, you want to give up you want to give up your your freedoms to God and serve him while you're fighting serving a guy? Wait, what's the difference to me? Like I always thought is like the birthright wasn't a God right, it was a birthright of freedom and liberty. And I've honed this over time. So I'm not like I was right. I mean, I'll
Yeah.
admit I was like Sam Harrison, like
Yeah,
let's nuke
yeah,
everything. That
yeah.
it's the
Yeah.
core of all evil and all.
Yeah.
I've certainly honed that thought process over the years, but I'd love to hear your evolution over your time and your general ideas and thoughts about it.
Yeah, I love talking about spirituality. I would like to know more at some point what you mean by anti-theist. I'm a non-theist. Um,
Okay. That's the
so I
same.
don't.
It's basically the anti part is theism is kind of a human made ideology, like idea.
Hmm.
So some of the base movement was out of it's called free thought that I stumbled
Okay.
upon. Someone mentioned free thought in the 1800s, I believe. And it was basically about how come people are saying that they're free from other people's tyranny, but not free from God's tyranny. Who's to tell you that God is one you should the tyranny because it's like why am I giving up my service here because you're serving God? I mean there's passages of serving God, so it
Yeah.
harkens to wait, you're not free then, are you? In that
Ah.
ideology. So I always thought that theism was humans bastardization and their ability to make us go to war over an idea and a fake thing and an invisible creature that they created and
Mm,
personified for us to fight over. i
mm,
see I see God as the concept of doing the better thing in the situation
mm.
given.
Okay.
I see it very similar to Peterson in that way, but what gets me is he doesn't say like God's not a thing because God to me is not
Mhm.
a thing.
Yeah,
It's
yeah, yeah.
like conceptually the idea of doing good, right? We talk about
Hmm.
etymology, the idea
Hmm.
of goodness, the goodness in each situation. And that's where the books of the Bible would Job and these other pieces of,
Mm,
Cain and Abel would give you stories to teach you the better of the outcomes or the better act in each of those situations that you come across.
mm. Okay, that's helpful. So in terms of my journey, I was raised in a um, very active Christian home. So like Christianity was everything that my family's life revolved around, right? Like even if today I were to go home and visit my parents, before we go out anywhere, we stand in a circle and we pray. We ask God to watch over us as we go wherever we want to go, right? So that's just
May I
a
ask how big your
snapshot.
family is?
I have
Immediate family?
four sisters. So mom, dad, four sisters. So a household of seven in total. And so everything revolves around religion in that sense. And that was true for me up until senior year in college when my understanding of Christianity started to become upended. Primarily because I had an anthropology professor who was a atheist and a liberal. I grew up in a conservative home, and a liberal, and I was conditioned to see both of those things as like other. I was conditioned to
Yeah,
other both of those
both of those
things.
were for me too. Yeah. Just so
Yeah,
you know.
and then um, my teacher showed up in a way that was like very loving for at a very like she showed us a video of these conservative Christian families that was very critical, but she didn't pass judgment on them. and she actually ended up fighting with an atheist student who was passing judgment on them. They got like into a verbal disagreement. It was very loud, but I was struck by how she showed up in a very loving way, and then that totally didn't make sense according to the heuristics and the boxes that I had built into my mind about how the way the world is supposed to work. And that led to depression, anxiety, because times that I was carrying no longer worked anymore. And so for the following few years, remember, this is when I start developing the theory of enchantment also. So for the next few
No
years,
pressure, no stress, no problem. You got this. You got just keep
yeah,
Fanny, Fanny put the load, right? Just put the load right on
yeah,
me is what
yeah,
you got to do.
yeah. Yeah. So I'm wrestling with spirituality, with religion. I never have a atheist phase, or at least the way I define that is like I never get to a place where I don't believe in the transcendent. That's how I would describe that. I never go through that. I go through phases where I'm angry with God. I've actually more recently gone through a phase where I'm angry at the conception of God I was led to believe in. But I've never sort of like not believed in the
That
transcendent.
tell me, do you mind sharing a little bit about that? Or is that a little too personal for you?
Sure. I'm trying to think of what's a good.
The reason I ask is this is like once again, we all come from different things and we have all learned and changed and evolved and tomorrow
For
I'm
sure.
different than today. And as soon as we
Yeah.
hang up, I'm going to be different than I was when we were talking. So
Yeah.
it's always good to know that somebody came from somewhere that you came from. So
Yeah, for
if we
sure.
can relate that someone feels exactly how you felt at that time, they might be able to watch this, relate to it, and that might help them give them a course. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
if you're happy to share, I'm always happy to let people, be open to that.
Yeah, I guess my anger was with the very, for lack of a better word, patriarchic conception of God that I was conditioned to believe in. There's no divine feminine in
The
the
he.
sort of. You're right. There's no she. There's only he. There's only
Right.
God the Father. There's only God the Son. God doesn't have any daughters. There's no like. There's no presence of the female really on the same level in the any of the stories that I was raised to believe. And of course, also the church that I grew up was patriarchic, was very much like women can't be preachers, can't be pastors. There's nothing, which, the implication is that there's nothing that women have to say about relationship with God. This is actually one of my critiques of Peterson, which is that I don't know if you saw he did
I
a Bible
heard that. I
series.
like that because he did the Exodus series, and there wasn't a woman.
There
I
wasn't
did
a
want to ask
single
you about
woman
that.
on the panel.
So there were four total people. Is that
Yeah,
correct?
I think so.
Okay. No, I'm once again, please don't. This is me asking the question. This isn't me taking Peterson's side. What's
Yeah,
the
yeah.
percentage of women in the field? Is it 25%? Would
I
it
have
would
no
it
idea. I have no
Okay,
idea what
and I
it
don't
is.
know what his circles are, and he's got his buddy circles that kind of agree with what he agrees with. I'm not defending him.
Yeah.
Please understand, because I do have my criticism. But when I saw that, I thought that was a very healthy criticism of him,
Yeah.
of his, because of four, you would think. I mean, one person out of four would be a good balance, at least to have another viewpoint from the matriarchy side.
I think also even more from my perspective, the reason why I want to see it is like by definition, I relate to the divine differently from a man does because I relate to reality differently from a man, the way a man does. A very basic biological difference is that I experience death once a month. Right? Because I get
That's
my
true. I never really
cycle.
thought about that. Right.
So
And
I
I
am
was looking even
in.
broader is that men deal with things and women deal with people in a more
Yeah.
general sense. But
I've
but
heard
obviously,
Peterson
yeah,
say that.
tell me about
Yeah.
this though. Tell me about this because I've never you just like there's an epiphany that you just shared with me, and I never
Yeah.
thought of it that way. So please,
Yeah, so I am, because as a woman, I am in touch with death and with the cycle of death and life and death and life in a very um, concrete, tactile way because I experience cycles every month, once a month. That relationship informs how I relate to time, how I relate to space, how I relate to the seasons, how I relate to agriculture, how I relate to food, how I relate to reality itself. And so it inevitably colors and informs how I relate to the divine, what we mean when we talk about the
Everything.
sense of the sacred, right? So by
Yeah.
definition, I'm going to have a different take than how a man will relate to whether it's the Old Testament or the Bible or any other sacred text. I would say I'm going to have a different relationship to the sense of the sacred than a man would have, and that's okay. These different takes are complementary, I would argue, right? And actually,
Right.
it's a beautiful thing to have both of those takes represented because they can shape each other, they can, wrestle with each other, they can inform each other, and a third thing will emerge from the, the two things coming into being.
Right.
And that's a missed opportunity when you don't have the foresight to platform that or to demonstrate that or to even be thinking about that. That's a missed opportunity. So
Yeah. I know what you mean. And to your point, if I know you didn't watch his other or read his other books, but like in a weird way, calling the feminine chaos,
oh
why
yeah.
not call it
He
the
does well
creative?
he does
Like
he does
it's
a little
just
bit of
and
that in Matt's meaning, but he
because he does a little
also
chaos order. They're like little digs almost. Like
yeah.
and I hate to say it, but it does seem that way. But it's almost like he's so traditionally conservative. It's like he doesn't know how to explain it because it's just worked all this time or something. You know what I mean?
Well,
Like
he's a Westerner also, right? He's not in the East. There's a whole other
yeah,
cosmology, and
true.
I've been on an Eastern trip, like
I think we could talk
intellectually,
about that if you like.
and yeah, we can
Yeah.
religiously since 2020. In 2020, I started meditating, started like
Okay, so out of Christianity, so college, you had this breakdown. Now I have a similar
yeah,
cognitive dissonance, and now what do? You're lost in college, right? With a
yeah.
religious, you're
Well, this is
religiously
after
homeless.
college. This is after college.
Okay,
So
okay.
this is like 2015 to
Oh,
2020, I
okay.
guess.
Oh, wow. All right.
Yeah.
So right before COVID, right when you get to look at yourself in the mirror every day for 3 years.
Right, right. Perfect timing. Divine timing.
Perfect
I don't,
timing.
by the way, I wasn't like depressed every single day between 2015
Right,
and
right. I totally get what you're saying.
2020.
It's
But
we
I
who
was,
wrestle with God. Let's not get ourselves.
yeah, exactly. I was wrestling. I was really like, there would be times where I would go home and I would sleep for most of the time because I hadn't been able to reconcile myself to my home. It's so interesting. It had a physical like correlate. It wasn't just an intellectual thing. Like I would go home and I would feel so tired and I would sleep for most of the time
It changes
because
purpose. It,
yeah,
it,
something wasn't
it
aligned.
literally does just there's the purpose. I mean,
Yeah. It was like a alarm bell was going off and I like an Alice in Wonderland or something. Um,
yeah.
you
So
know.
you started getting into 2020 comes and tell me about what
Yeah.
your evolution from there.
So in December of 2019, I watched a great film by my favorite film director of all time, Terrence Malick. The name of the film is called A Hidden Life. It's a true story. It's the only film he's done to date that's based on a true story. It's about this Austrian man who becomes like a non-violent dissident against the Nazis, and he goes all the way up to Berlin in the prison system until he's killed. But I walked out of the theater. I started in the theater, and I walked out so deeply feeling like I needed to start meditating because it's a very meditative film, right? It's like a meditation as he makes this
I would
journey all the
assume it
way up to
has like a
Berlin.
music and kind of pulls you through then that in that
Yeah,
kind of meditative way.
and all of Terrence Malick's or most of Terrence Malick's films, nature is a character. So the way his cinematography is done is very, very unique, and he's just an incredible storyteller in that sense. So I come away from that, but I'm still not like fully on the bandwagon. I'm also talking to Coleman about his experience meditating, Coleman Hughes, so I'm asking him about it a little bit. And then of
Yeah, I'd
course
love to
March,
get in a conversation with Coleman as well, because yeah.
yeah. So
And I
I
want to
missed
circle
one
back
by
on
him
that in a
meditating.
second, but yeah, because he had some Israel Gaza stuff that I'd like to circle possibly back on. I'm curious if you
Sure.
talk with him about that. But if you didn't, it's totally
I
okay.
didn't. I didn't. No,
Okay,
I
no
didn't.
worries. So you talk with Coleman about his spirituality meditation.
Yeah, and then March 2020 descends on us, and a friend of mine told me about the work of John Vervaeke. Do you know who John Vervaeke is?
I know John Vervaeke. I know that name so well. Please, it's like on the tip of my brain.
So he's a cognitive scientist at the University of Toronto, same place where Peterson came out of. He's actually Peterson's colleague. There's actually a great debate, old debate between the two of them.
I probably
About
watched that. That's probably where I remember that.
it's really, really good. So anyway, I start following his stuff. He has a really beautiful podcast called Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. This 50-episode podcast where he goes through like the history of the world, starting from the Axial Revolution all the way to the Hellenistic times. I want to say actually
Mel
even
Brooks, History of the
further,
World Part
even
1. I
further,
get it.
all the way to Martin
Yeah.
Luther. Actually, like it's
Wow.
really, really, really good.
Wow, Martin Luther. That's like, is that medieval times, right? Catholic? Martin Luther,
I don't
15,
know.
16?
I
Wow.
don't know. I don't know,
Anyway,
but it's
sorry.
it's pretty
I'm
extensive.
happy to feign my ignorance there. It's kind of like whenever I get something wrong about like somebody in pop culture who's like a woman, somebody
Hmm.
who's hot. Like if I don't get Taylor Swift's birthday right, I'm okay
Yeah,
with that. Like
yeah,
I
yeah,
kind of
yeah,
take it as a badge of honor that I don't know it. So I'll be
yeah.
okay with that. Like
I don't know. I don't
anyway.
know when Martin Luther was,
All right.
but
So
um,
so spirituality meditation through
so
Vervaeke.
so
Vervaeke.
he was
Okay.
teaching meditation during COVID. So he would go onto YouTube and like produce videos of himself teaching Vipassana meditation. So that's when I started meditating. And I would do every day, 30 minutes, 45 minutes. At some point I was doing an hour a day. And I did that for a number of years. At the same time, I'm starting to study Taoism. I read like this the Tao of Pooh, which is about how Pooh Bear is like or Winnie the Pooh is a Taoist text. Um, and I'm reading more Carl Jung as well. And yeah, just like slowly but surely. Oh, I also watched Avatar: The Last Airbender for the first time in my life, which has a huge impact on me. The cartoon, not
Uh-huh.
the movie, God forbid.
The
Uh,
cartoon, right? The movie was a little different, but you're talking about the cartoon one, right?
the cartoon, yeah. So all of a sudden, the East is entering into my consciousness, and um, what has happened since? Now I have a morning chanting practice. I studied with a woman for the past 7 months who's a vocal coach who like used the chakra system and studied with many different traditions in the East, in the Amazon, all over the world, and came up with this system based on the chakra system where there's a chant that's associated with each chakra, and you chant basically for 30 minutes a day. And I've been doing this for the past 7 months. It's basically
And
like
you're
giving
talking about all
yourself
the 7 chakras, correct? Core,
one
heart.
chakra. Yeah, 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 the seven chakras. But you
Yeah,
just
but
do
you're going through
one.
all set, but you're doing one at a time.
You do one at a time, and you do like one for 40 days, and then you move on to the next one for 40
Okay,
days.
right. So it's like systematic. Yeah, like
Yeah,
you
yeah,
focus on
yeah,
each one, like a
yeah.
constant cleansing or a
Yeah,
yeah
it's like a sound
revisitative.
bath. You're like giving yourself a sound bath
Yeah,
every morning, essentially.
yeah. I hear that.
And it's been really cool. I really enjoy it. Like it really it's like a tuning fork. It really orients me and harmonizes me and gives me a sense of balance and a way to start my day that feels really beautiful and sacred and full of reverence. Like I feel when I wake up in the morning that there is form, and that's another thing that I admire about the East, and many different traditions, including like Japanese traditions that I've come across. There's a lot of like obviously also with like Tai Chi, stuff like that, there's form, right? There's form in the way things are done. And as a dancer, someone who loves dance, I resonate with that deeply. I also simultaneously to all of this, last August started playing capoeira. Do you know what capoeira is?
I know the name. Once again, I know of it. I've heard of it. Is it
Yeah.
is it a percussion?
No, 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 it's not an instrument. So
Oh, okay.
It's a Brazilian martial art form. It's also known
Oh
as
yeah, the thing with the dancing where you're like fluid, like doing the
yeah,
dance and
yeah,
the
yeah.
swing. Okay, yeah, capoeira. Yeah, yeah,
So
that's
some
awesome. So
yeah.
that must be great because you come from a dancing background. That must be like this
Yeah.
perfect integration of that for you.
It's really what's cool about it is that when I'm reading, let's say, Buddhist texts on the Bodhisattva tradition, which is about loving kindness and compassion, and they're
Yeah, I have the
saying,
Dharmaparna. The Dharmaparna.
okay,
I,
yeah.
so I read through that every once in a while.
So what's
Try.
interesting about having a movement practice in capoeira is that it actually, we talked about contrasts earlier, it actually makes the text make more sense to me.
That would
It's
make sense. Well, you think increased blood flow? Well, I
Yeah.
mean, that makes sense. Increased blood flow would be increased cognitive ability. Also,
Yeah.
the flow of your body in tune with the energy or the frequency of the idea. All of your everything then tunes to your point, the tuning fork. It all makes
Right.
sense to me.
Yeah, and those have so having those two together, the chanting practice in the morning, and I do usually do capoeira in the evenings. They start to like these exercises start to talk to each other, or they start to relate to each other, right? And it's
Yeah.
like really, really
Does the
cool.
evening or does the morning kind of instruct your evening capoeira routine? Like depending on your day, like when you wake up, like in the way you say they talk to each other, do they ever kind of in that way work hand in
No,
glove?
not in that way, although maybe I should pay extra attention to see if it is doing that.
I
But
wouldn't have asked that if it probably isn't a thing to pay. No, I'm just kidding.
um, so not explicitly, but just in the sense that like the chanting practice is basically a stillness practice and the capoeira practice is a movement practice, and it's like when
That's
people
true.
say be still, you can't know how to be still unless you know how to move, you can't know how to move unless you know how to be
Right.
still,
As contrast,
right?
right.
So
That's
so
true.
contrast actually
So
really
once again,
helps.
it's almost like with movement or with the lack of stillness. Like
Right,
or
it's
with stillness or something like in that way.
in the same way that we're talking about compassion and being with
And yeah,
something.
integrating the two, right? The movement
Right,
with stillness, because the stillness is more of the mind. It doesn't have to be a physical stillness, right?
exactly.
To that
Exactly.
point.
But with chanting, I'm in a seated lotus position, and I'm on my little meditation seat and I'm just chanting, and it really harmonizes my well it activates the vagus system, and which slows down the fight or flight or freeze brain, which is nice. The limbic system.
So yeah, it kind of slows everything down, almost like a frame by frame kind of piece.
Yeah,
And
yeah, yeah.
s-
Yeah.
so you've done this a lot. I
Yeah.
have to ask. I'll ask if you've done any kind of alternative ways of getting to a different kind of consciousness outside
Are you
of
talking
what
about
we imbibe.
drugs?
Yeah, sure. Drugs.
Yeah.
Let's go with drugs. I don't whatever it is. I don't know what they are.
I love the
But
word drugs, by the
anything?
way. Some people are
Oh,
ashamed of
cool.
this
Okay,
word.
tell me about that. Is there something about that etymology or
Yes.
something?
Yes,
Tell me.
there is. Yes,
Okay, tell me about it because I want to hear this.
I was walking past the pharmacy the other day, and I noticed that the logo above the pharmacy, it's a local pharmacy. It's not like a corporate pharmacy, but it was like a bowl and a thing to
And a
mash.
mortar and pestle. It's a mortar
Mortar
and
and
pestle.
pestle. Exactly. Exactly. So the word drug comes from the French drogas, meaning dried herbs. That's all a drug is. It's a dried herb. That's what a drug is. And of course, it has all this baggage that we've attached to it because of laws and, crazy, crazy laws, insane laws. We could get into that if you want. But
All right. We can. Oh, we certainly can talk about
the
anything, any of that. I mean, you're going to be at Freedom Fest, so we're definitely going to talk about
yeah,
having laws being a little excessive and a little ridiculously weighted, right?
yeah. So
So,
anyway,
all right.
yes, I
So
microdose
drugs. Do you do
psilocybin.
them? No.
Yes, yes, I microdose psilocybin.
Okay.
And I the first psychoactive drug I took was LSD back in 2020, actually. Oh, forgot about that. So in January 2020, which I'm sure contributed to my decision to eventually meditate, I did
Right, and I want to
LSD.
hear about that
And
experience
LSD,
because that sounds like an opening, right? It's a mind opening, not a mind
yeah,
altering
yeah,
drug, in my
yeah,
opinion. So I'd like to hear your
yeah.
experience with that.
So LSD, I did it inside. I took it inside my house with a friend, and the first thing I noticed was the patterns of the carpet started moving. And the outcome of that whole experience for me was about a 4 hour, 5 hour trip. We put on music, we had grapes and other fruits to nosh on. The outcome of that was actually an interest in fashion. So it was like prior to LSD, I wasn't
Patterns,
really
like when you say
exactly.
fashion, like
Yeah, but like clothing, like
right,
outfits
right.
and
But I'm
things
saying,
like
like, did you
that.
start seeing patterns in the carpet? Like when you talk about the carpet moving, it makes me think if that's where you would have gone in that kind of
Yeah,
way,
the patterns on the carpet started like moving, right? Like prior to the
and like
ingestion, they
almost
were
exposing
static.
themselves, like almost like emerging out of the
Yeah,
carpet, like coming to
yeah,
life in a way.
yeah, yeah. Exactly, exactly.
Okay.
So after that, I started paying closer attention to geometry or to colors, to geometry, and the way it manifested for me was an interest in fashion.
Fractals and all that kind of interesting stuff, right?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And then shortly thereafter, I think I did shrooms, but I don't remember the first time I did shrooms actually.
I've only done cannabis. I'd like to
Oh
do the
wow.
ayahuasca and all that, but
Oh, I've done
in your
ayahuasca.
meditation, yeah. So I back on the spirituality, if I may, because it's so
Yeah.
fascinating because I at 40 years old, had like a midlife crisis,
Mm,
and my bottom was set higher than most people.
mm.
Like, it's kind of like, how people are like, I'm broke. Like, people are like a $400 emergency away from being completely bankrupt. Like, everybody is.
Yeah.
Well, like, I set mine at like 1,000, say. So my bottom is higher than other people's bottoms. It's
Sure.
just, I always put myself a fudge factor. Like, people have like AA who like the bottom is like a car accident where their leg snaps off or something. They're like, oh, I had my
Yeah.
awakening. I should get better. Well, I
Yeah.
would just didn't want to be here. I just didn't feel right here.
Mm,
It just was weird. So I actually sought a neurolinguistic programmer.
mm,
So a person was actually in the military in Britain. He was like one of the Navy SEAL, the SAS guys, some really interesting guy. But he had
mm,
like a degree in like quantum mechanics and applied mathematics. So
mm.
for me, I don't go talking to psychologists because there's no way I can relate to a
Sure.
psychologist or there's just not, it's not happening. It's like you want to, like, oh, you can switch. I'd be switching every time. I'd be like, no, this one doesn't fit and this one fit. So I never met this guy. He was doing like an introductory thing, and it's NLP because it's different. It's not psychology. So, he's trying to get people in. So he's doing some introductory thing. And I'm sitting in the waiting room, and he calls me in his little room, and there's a sofa, and he's got his little chair. So I just walk in, and he looks at me, and he said the perfect thing. He cocked his head. He
Mm,
goes, "You're different." And it's
mm,
like that click,
mm.
like the waterwork, like
Yeah.
waterworks, everything. Well,
Wow.
turns out I had a really bad car accident at 13 years old,
Mm,
and I had a near death experience, and I had an out of body experience,
mm,
and that was a long time ago. So I'm here now, 40 years old, and I walk in this guy's office, and he tells like I just had continually felt worse and worse over time to the point where I just was like, I got to talk to somebody about this.
yeah.
And I'm going to share it with you, and I'll stop. I can delve into it more, but I've shared it before on a podcast, so I don't want to bore people who've heard the same stupid story I say over and over again. But basically, I went to see this person, and I started getting help, and he started doing a meditation with me, and I had
Mm,
never done a meditation. Didn't understand
mhm.
it. He was doing a guided meditation. You're on the beach, and you pick up this sapphire, and you look up in the sky, and no joke, this I'm telling you what I experienced. I'm just going to tell you. It was the Thursday before the shooting in South Carolina with Clementa Pinckney, and I saw
Oh
it.
wow. Whoa.
And when I tell you, you can look at me and tell you that I saw what I saw. I can't tell you that it's real, but I can tell you
Yeah.
that I experienced this. So the
Yeah.
direct it was a black man in a suit behind a podium with like a
Mm,
microphone, and he
mhm.
shakes to the right. He looks to you like he's shaking somebody's hand to the right, and he moves his hand to the left, and I see a flash because like it was
Whoa.
in this vision, in this meditation.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I come out of it and I look at the guy and I go, I think I just saw Obama get shot because this is
Mm,
2015, and you make that associative, right? That
yeah.
subconscious association, black man in a suit. I mean,
Sure.
that's the president for goodness sakes at the time, right?
Sure.
And he looked at me deadpan and he goes, that either will happen or it happens somewhere else. And
Mm,
like, I was like distraught. I didn't understand it.
yeah.
I go home and I come back the next week because it's a Thursday, but it happened Wednesday.
Mm,
And he actually shared it with me that I saw that. Like I didn't make any
mm,
connection to anything. And he like showed me that. And then
mm,
ever since then, like the floodgates open for me and I get fun ones, cute ones, and
yeah.
I get really awful ones. So
And
like meditation for me.
they all come as a result of getting into this particular type of meditation.
Yeah.
Okay.
So anytime I get relaxed or calm when I do a guided meditation, I don't go to the guided places. I go
Okay.
wherever they take me.
That's interesting.
So, yeah, so it's like I've been fighting and my car accident was bad. My dad is a man of faith and I love my dad. My dad is an amazing human being. He came to America at 19 from Germany alone. He was born
Mm,
in 1940 in Hamburg. the guy lived a life. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
He had a sibling that died of malnutrition. They walked
Mm.
120 miles to Berlin from Hamburg. I mean, it's crazy. I don't know
Wow.
how I'm here. That I'm here is just a miracle in itself. And that we
Mm.
should all be grateful that we have the opportunities here that we have, like, to be completely
Yeah.
honest. Um, and so I watch him, and he's a man of faith, and I love that. I admire his faith. I don't agree with it in any way, but I admire
Mhm.
it.
Mhm.
And when I had my car accident, I'm bedridden for 9 weeks in a full body cast with a broken femur, and he's sitting there. Angel saved you. Angel
Mm.
saved you. Angel
Mm.
saved you. And I'm like, well, who put me here? You know what I mean? It's like, it's a simple
Yeah.
question, right? I mean, that's what a 13-year-old thinks, right?
Of course.
So
Yeah.
that's where I started my quest. And since
Mm.
then, I went on that, and I became atheist, like anti-theist. And when I say anti-theist, it's really the idea, the way the human has bastardized the personal
Is it the
connection,
thingness
the God.
specifically? Yeah.
Yeah. So like I said, when I go into meditative states, it's actually challenging for me because I go off in places.
Mm.
And I
Mhm.
don't know that they're real. It could just be my imagination. I mean, I've done past life regressions. I've done
Yeah.
all different things. I mean, I even went to an Esther Hicks thing with, son of what is it, what is it, son of
Is that
Abraham, one of
Jehovah's
those.
Witness? I don't know. I don't know
Oh
that
no, it's
lineage.
son of Abraham. She does channeling, and
Oh,
like
okay.
through stuff. So anyway, there's a whole discipline in that. And so I
For
was
sure.
really curious about how you connected all that, and what you came with the East and the West, and how you integrate those two pieces.
Well, there's a great author named David Abrams whose books I love. One is called Spell the Sensuous, and the other is called Becoming Animal. I'm actually reading Becoming Animal right now. And he, in Becoming Animal, talks about how he goes to the Andes mountains and he like comes across all these shamans and these spiritual workers in the mountains and how they're so much more like embodied in their um like we forget that as human beings we are animals, like we're part of the animal kingdom. And he talks about how those shamans in those mountains understand that, and the way they show up is like very much like in tune with the animal world. I've also,
So they
it's
pay
interesting,
respect to like the environment and and
not
the
just pay
atmosphere and things
respect,
like
they like are
that. Right.
communicating
Obviously,
with
right.
the birds and stuff like
Oh
that.
wow. Okay. So they're completely integrated in this
Yeah, yeah,
ecosystem in
yeah.
a way.
Yeah. Which I find very fascinating, and I wonder if
That
there's like
is.
something in your lineage that's like related or rooted in a shamanistic tradition. I wouldn't be surprised if that was the case. So that's the first thing that came to mind when you were describing that story. In terms of integrating the East and the West, it's not really like a, I don't know, it's not a explicit project I have. I just wake up every day and I do my chanting and I say thank you and I say blessings a lot more. I give thanks a lot more, like regularly, which
We
feels really
really need, that's
nice.
a lot. There's two things, right? Like, and once again,
Yeah,
we go back to the thing, encouragement for others
yeah,
and gratefulness for yourself, just gratefulness for yourself, right? Like, if
yeah.
someone wants to do something other than obviously hurting themselves, you want to intervene. But if
Right.
someone wants to pursue a project, why? Why do you start with but or no? Why would you want to start that? Like, why not be like, that sounds cool. Tell me more. Like, I
Yeah,
don't, you know what I mean? We could just shift so many conversations if we come from that other side.
for
I've always
sure.
thought about, like, negotiations, you sit across the table. What if we sat on the same side of the table and looked at it from the same angle? That's the only way we're going to
Yeah,
really understand it. And we tend to be so combative and proving our point that we're not willing to entertain another idea, and
yeah.
beliefs become dangerous.
Well, it's because our sense of self is very insecure.
Right, exactly. So, like,
Right.
you have a belief, you attack the belief, but it feels like an attack on you because you have that belief. So
Right.
now, not the you no longer talk about the content or the context of the belief, you're talking about the person who's holding it. And that
Right.
jumps the gun to the actual problem. We do that all the time. It
Yeah.
seems to be the struggle.
It's another this is water problem because we do it all the time, but we don't realize that we're doing it, right?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm really grateful for the conversation. It's been an hour and a half. I hope it's blinked for you and hope it's passed And
Yeah.
I would love to sit on some conversations in the future if you ever have any, because I'll talk with you offline, obviously, once we hit end here. But yeah, I mean, it's been a pleasure. Is there anything else you'd love to share? Anything else you'd like to talk about?
Just if people are interested in finding out more about Theory of Enchantment, they can go to theoryoфenchantment.com. You can also follow me at Steve Valdary on all of the, channels if you would like, Instagram, Twitter, so on and so forth. And other than that, thank you for having me, Mark. It's been a great conversation.
Thank you so much. Yeah, what I'll do is I'll copy and paste everything in, and I started doing transcripts. So I'll just copy on a page and I'll share that with you. Just for your reference, I have like a Freedom Fest page. I'll have everybody on there. So if you want to
Oh,
see
cool.
anybody else that's going to be there, you can just click on their page and listen to their conversations and whatnot and anything if
Awesome.
you're interested. But thank you so much. Once again, everyone, go to Freedom Fest. Use the code Conscious50 for $50 off the package, the current package. Chloe's going to be there. Chloe, do you know what day you're going to be there? I know the schedule came out.
Oh,
You might not know it
no,
right
but
now.
we can put it in the show notes.
No worries, I'll put it in. Yeah, I'll put it in there. But
Yeah.
everybody come to Vegas. It's going to be fun. We're going to be there.
Yeah.
You talk about imbibing. I live in Arizona, so I'm driving. So
Oh,
guess who's
nice.
going to be bringing a lot of imbibing? Just so you know. So I will be taking care of a lot of my people, if you know what I mean.
Nice.
But I really look forward to meeting you in person, because this has been, for
Likewise.
me, it's been enlightening, because I'll be honest, I watched your conversation, and they are extremely thoughtful, and you put so
Mm.
much time into that. And like even that you spoke with, like, obviously, Coleman and things like that. And that's I'm trying to reach up. I'm trying to elevate,
Yeah.
because I'm asking people to bend down a lot to reach and talk to me. I'm not anybody
Sure.
yet.
Mm.
But I know I can have this conversations, and I know that I hope that we can always find some kind of way to contribute with each other. And
Yeah.
if I can lift myself up a little bit, people don't have to bend down as far. So, and then
Yeah.
hopefully I can bend down and help lift somebody else up. So I'm so grateful that you reach down to talk to someone like me and my ilk, and I will be at that level that you look back and go, oh my gosh, this is where it all started, or something like that.
Beautiful hero's journey, Mark.
There you go. Thank you so much. I'm so grateful for the conversation. We'll talk offline, and thank you again. Everybody, have a great day. Thank you so much to Chloe for joining me on Knocked Conscious. 1, 2, 3, 4. Good night, sweetheart. Well, it's time to go. Good night, sweetheart. Well, it's time to go. I hate to leave you, but I really must say, good night, sweetheart. Good